Once upon a time, in a remote land bordering a forest, a pregnant woman was snatched by a ferocious bear and held captive in a deep cave. After months spent in darkness and fear, she gave birth to a boy of extraordinary appearance. His upper body was covered in fur like a bear's, while his lower body bore the form of a human. Named Bear John, the child grew up within the gloomy cave, never knowing the sunlight or the outside world. Although raised among beasts, human blood and a fierce survival instinct coursed through his veins. As time passed, the half-human, half-bear boy matured, possessing physical strength far surpassing that of any ordinary adult. Aware of his unjust captivity and yearning to reclaim his human heritage, Bear John decided to use his mighty arms to smash through the colossal boulder blocking the cave entrance. Together with his mother, he braved countless dangers and escaped the wild bear's pursuit to return to the human world. However, his bizarre appearance and terrifying strength quickly made him an object of fear and ostracism among the villagers, marking the beginning of a challenging journey ahead. Leaving behind the village where he was met with cold, hostile stares, Bear John set out on an uncertain path, hoping to find a place where he truly belonged. His extraordinary strength made it impossible for him to perform ordinary farm work without accidentally destroying his tools. Realizing he needed a weapon worthy of his physique, John sought out a local blacksmith and commissioned an iron club weighing hundreds of kilograms. He easily snapped the first few staffs like dry kindling, one after another, until the blacksmith was forced to gather his finest iron to forge a massive, sturdy staff, a weapon. As he continued his journey, John Bear encountered three men who possessed extraordinary abilities rivaling his own. The first could uproot massive ancient trees with a single hand, the second could level towering mountains, and the third possessed hands capable of shaping or shattering the hardest rock. Recognizing a kindred spirit in these men of immense power, John Bear impressed them with his own might. The four of them swore a brotherhood and set out together to seek greater challenges across the land. The four brothers ventured deep into a dense, untamed forest and discovered a magnificent castle that was completely deserted. Finding it an ideal place to stay, they decided to settle there and divided their duties. Three would go hunting in the forest each day, while one remained behind to look after the castle and cook for the group. Things went smoothly until it was the eldest brother's turn to stay home. Just as the pot of food was steaming hot, a tiny yet ferocious demon suddenly appeared, attempting to steal the meal and using magic to savagely beat the caretaker before vanishing. Over the next 2 days, the same terrifying scenario played out for the second and third brothers. Despite possessing strength enough to move mountains and uproot trees, both were utterly helpless. They suffered the same fate, outwitted and beaten to a pulp by the demon. Ashamed, all three kept this bitter truth a secret, claiming illness to explain their injuries. On the fourth day, it was John Bear's turn to manage the castle. When the demon returned to try and steal the food, John Bear did not flinch. Instead, he struck back hard with an iron club weighing 100 catties, pinning the demon firmly against a massive tree before it could unleash any of its cunning magic. Returning from the hunt, the three brothers were amazed to find the castle undisturbed and a delicious meal waiting for them. When John Bear led them to the tree where the demon had been trapped, they found only a severed body part left behind in the creature's escape, along with a trail of fresh blood stretching deep into the forest. Following the blood trail, the four brothers arrived at an ancient, bottomless well, pitch black and unfathomably deep. Realizing the demon had fled into the underworld below, they decided to weave a long rope and fashion a basket so each of them could descend to investigate. The three brothers took turns stepping into the basket, but after lowering only a few meters into the gloomy darkness, they would panic and frantically tug the rope to be pulled back up. Finally, John Bear stepped into the basket, clutching an iron staff, calmly instructing his companions to keep lowering the rope until he reached the bottom. As he descended deeper, the air grew cold and hazy until his feet touched the ground of a completely different world deep underground, a place where the exhausted demon lay in hiding, guarding dark secrets. Stepping into the gloomy underworld, John Bear clutched his torch tightly and began to follow a faint trail of blood along the ground. Before long, he discovered a magnificent palace shrouded in an air of melancholy. Venturing deeper inside, John Bear was astonished to find three incredibly beautiful princesses held captive by a demon. Each was imprisoned in her own opulent chamber, guarded by wicked creatures and living in constant, utter terror. Upon meeting John Bear, the princesses were filled with a mix of joy and fear. They warned him that the demon was nursing its wounds in the innermost chamber and wielded dangerous magic. Unflinching, John Bear marched straight toward the demon's lair. A fierce and brutal battle ensued deep underground. Despite the demon's grotesque sorcery, John Bear, armed with extraordinary strength and his massive iron club, dealt fatal blows that utterly destroyed the ferocious beast, liberated the three princesses, and gathered all the treasures and magical artifacts within the palace. After slaying the demon, John Bear led the three princesses back to the mouth of the ancient well to find a way to the surface. He placed the youngest princess and a portion of the treasure into the basket, then tugged the rope to signal his three sworn brothers above to hoist it up. Each princess was brought to the surface safely, amidst cheers and a surging greed at the well's opening. Upon seeing the princess's exquisite beauty and the vast array of diamonds and fine silks, envy and avarice completely corrupted the minds of the three sworn brothers. When it was John Bear's turn to step into the basket, his cautious nature prompted him to first place his 100-pound iron staff and his hat inside to test his companions. Just as he had anticipated, when the basket was only halfway up, the three treacherous men deliberately cut the rope. The basket plummeted into the yawning depths of the well, shattering into pieces with a violent crash. Believing John Bear had perished in the abyss, the three traitors gleefully divided the treasure, forced the princesses to keep the secret, and escorted them back to the surface palace to claim the reward from the king. Abandoned in the dark underworld, and left to seethe with bitterness over the betrayal of those he once called brothers, John Bear did not succumb to despair. He trudged through the desolate subterranean wastes, searching for a way back to the world of light. While wandering, John Bear stumbled upon a colossal eagle's nest atop a high peak, where a giant venomous serpent was slithering in to devour the helpless chicks. Without a moment's hesitation, John unleashed his extraordinary strength to slay the vicious reptile, ensuring the safety of the young birds. Upon returning to the nest and finding her offspring unharmed beside the carcass of the venomous snake, the mother eagle was deeply grateful to John Bear for saving their lives. Wishing to repay this profound debt, the eagle offered to carry him back to the surface, though she warned that the flight across the boundary between worlds would require a vast amount of food to sustain her strength. John Bear immediately prepared several large sacks of meat from the serpent's body and hung them around the eagle. The perilous ascent from the abyss began. The eagle soared into the air, and whenever she cried out, John would feed a large chunk of meat into her crop, fueling her wings to beat their way through the gloomy clouds. The ascent toward the world of light felt endless as they traversed the gloomy depths. Once they had cleared the mouth of the well, the supply of meat prepared for the journey suddenly ran out. Just as the mother eagle began to falter and lose strength in mid-air, John Bear, without a moment's hesitation, used his knife to carve a piece of flesh from his own thigh and fed it to the giant bird. Fueled by this final burst of energy, the eagle summoned the strength to power through the remaining distance, carrying John Bear close to a magnificent castle before finally landing, utterly exhausted. Moved by his supreme sacrifice and courage, the mother eagle unleashed a burst of magical energy that completely healed the wound on John Bear's leg, restoring him to his full strength. After parting ways with the giant eagle, John Bear donned the tattered rags of a wanderer and headed toward the capital. He concealed his half-human, half-bear identity, quietly searching for the whereabouts of his 3 treacherous brothers and the 3 princesses held captive within the royal palace. Throughout the capital, a bustling atmosphere of preparation for the royal wedding filled the streets. Deceived by the lies of 3 traitors, the king had decided to marry his 3 daughters to them as a reward for their supposed rescue. However, realizing the true, greedy nature of these impostors, the princesses were determined to find a way to delay the wedding. United in purpose, they proposed a seemingly impossible condition. The wedding would only proceed if the grooms brought magical chests containing sets of gold, silver, and gemstone jewelry, capable of glowing on their own and emitting soothing melodies, treasures that existed only in the palace of the underworld. Cornered and lacking the craftsmanship to create such items, the 3 traitors turned to the region's finest goldsmith, threatening to kill him and his entire family if he failed to meet the demands within a few days. Just as the old goldsmith was consumed by despair and fear, John Bear stepped forward, offering to work as an apprentice in the shop and take on the task himself. He reassured the old man, asked for a vacant room, and instructed that no one was to disturb him. When night fell, John Bear produced the magical chests and the magnificent jewels he had gathered from the demon's underground lair. Thanks to these enchanted items, he effortlessly crafted the exquisite gifts exactly as the princesses had demanded, without breaking a sweat. The next morning, when the miraculous treasure chests were presented to the royal court, the entire assembly gasped in amazement. Upon seeing the familiar chest, the youngest princess immediately recognized it as a treasure from the underworld and a sign that the true hero was still alive. She quickly realized that the person who had crafted them could be neither the old goldsmith nor the 3 impostors, but rather John Bear. Without revealing her secret, she persuaded the king to host a magnificent banquet to celebrate the completion of the gifts, while simultaneously issuing an order for every goldsmith, along with all their apprentices and assistants in the capital, to attend. She knew this was the only opportunity to bring John Bear out of the shadows and force the 3 traitors to answer for their crimes before the king. At the lavish royal banquet, hundreds of flickering candles illuminated a majestic yet tension-filled hall. As the goldsmiths and their assistants filed in to present themselves, John Bear stepped out from the crowd. Though his attire was humble, his powerful physique and resolute gaze immediately commanded everyone's attention. Upon catching sight of the familiar figure of the hero who had risked his life to save them underground, the 3 princesses could not contain their emotions. They instantly left their royal seats and rushed to embrace John Bear, weeping openly. The youngest princess knelt before the throne and boldly revealed the brutal truth to the king. The story of the demon in the underworld, John Bear's life or death battle, and the treachery of the 3 liars who had cut the rope, casting their own brother into the abyss, solely to steal the credit and the treasure. Once the truth was laid bare, the king's shock gave way to unbridled rage. He slammed his fist against the throne and roared a command to the guards, who instantly drew their weapons, subdued the three hypocritical villains, and forced them to their knees on the cold stone floor. Once justice had been served and the wicked punished, the king offered John Bear the throne and great honors, along with the hands of his princesses in marriage. Yet, to the astonishment of the entire court, John Bear humbly declined all offers of fame, power, and romance. Reflecting on the journey that had taken him from a gloomy, dark cavern to a magnificent palace, he realized he did not belong amidst luxurious silks or upon a confining throne, a seat of power that could easily corrupt the heart, just as it had corrupted those who once betrayed him. Quietly leaving all the royal treasures for the king to distribute among the poor, John Bear donned a simple cloak, took up his familiar iron staff, and walked out of the capital as the sun set. He returned to the rugged paths of the world, venturing into distant lands to protect the downtrodden, punish oppressive tyrants, and bring justice to the impoverished. The image of this half-man, half-bear hero, steadfastly championing the cause of righteousness, became an immortal legend. He emerged as a symbol of freedom whose fame spread across the villages. The people remembered him not as a king, but as a great knight of the wild.
Thank you for watching the entire film. Please subscribe to the channel to catch our latest releases. Goodbye, and see you next time.